Hi, everyone. You are hopefully in the throes of writing your first speech. So you have found a topic that you like and you think your audience will benefit from. You have started to do some research and you are putting your thoughts on paper. And remember, as you write your speech, it's much like writing an essay. You want to get everything down. You want your introduction to get our attention. You want to state your credibility or ethos. You want to state your thesis statement. What is your topic and what are you trying to tell us about it? And then you want to have 2 to 3 main points in the amount of time that you have. The other component of this speech is that you are doing some outside research. So it's not just your own personal experience or beliefs. It is research that you've done and you are sharing with the audience. And in order to ethically credit your research, you need to do 2 things when you're giving a speech. You need to verbally tell your audience where your sources are coming from, and then you need to include your sources in a bibliography. So I have pulled up a student speech from last summer, and it was a student who chose to do a speech on the 80s and film culture of the 80s. And this student had actually done some acting and was a lover of 80s movies and did a presentation about movies that she loved and why. So I wanted to walk you through what her formal outline or her outline looked like for her speech, and just to highlight a couple things that I want you to be doing. So you are required to do outside research for this speech. And remember that in research, you are looking for credible, relevant, current information. Depending on your topic, if it's cutting edge and newer, the more current, the better. You know, if you're researching 80s movies, you might be diving back into that decade. Sources, you are open to finding information, obviously, through Google searches. So that's going to yield you web articles, web pages. You're also welcome to find things like YouTube videos, TED Talk videos, documentaries, movies. And outside of those things, don't forget you have access to things like physical books or ebooks, newspaper articles, journal articles, magazine articles, graphics, graphs, as well as things like interviews. If you are doing a topic that has a person in your life that you know of who has expertise in that area, you might find that doing an actual interview with that person would count as a source. So obviously, the more credible they are, the more credible that you become when you present the information about what you talk to them about. And interviews don't have to be set down formal face-to-face. In today's era, you can do Zoom interviews, email interviews, phone interviews, even text interviews, so long as you get enough information and that you're able to tell your audience how your source is qualified. So in this speech by a student named Jessica, she chose to do the 80s and film in the 80s. And as one of her sources, she cites the New York Times. And so she's written it out in her presentation, in her speech outline, and she's given a verbal citation to the source. So when you're publicly speaking and when you're inserting outside information, you need to tell your audience that the information is coming from elsewhere. That does a couple of things. It protects you from plagiarism, and it acknowledges that the information is coming from outside of you. It gives them proper credit, and that should build up the ethos for your audience as well. You know, your audience is going to have a familiarity with a lot of the common sources like the New York Times, the Washington Post, Time Magazine, things that are in our cultural circles, if you will. There will be publications that most of us are familiar with. If you find sources from other publications that aren't as familiar, you might need to briefly describe what the publication is. So I wanted to point out that this is a component. This is when you're actually presenting. The other part of your speech for when you are doing sources is your bibliography. And your bibliography is an alphabetized list of the sources that you're using in your speech. You don't have to tell your source or your audience. You don't have to tell your audience your bibliography. You don't have to read these out. This is for me, your instructor's benefit. I want to be able to see where you got your information, how old it is, how I can access it. So you see here, She has cited an article from Vulture magazine, an online magazine. She's given the author's name, the title of the piece, when it was published, the fact it was published through Vulture, and here I can click to see the exact piece. So when you do outside sources, the component that you need to give me is this full bibliography, and this can be included in your speech outline. And the part that you need to give your audience is your verbal citation. So those are the two components that go into citing your sources when you give a speech. Just like when you give an essay, you turn in an essay, you have a bibliography, but the added component for public speaking is verbally telling your audience where your sources come from. And a website that can be particularly helpful to you is one called OWL Purdue. It is the online writing lab at Purdue University. It has a wonderful MLA APA citation guide on it. I will link it in this video area. If you also would like some more personalized one-on-one help, our writing center is happy to do that. They have writing Zoom tutors and actual people in the Learning Commons. We also have an online writing center where you can submit your draft and get feedback that way. So there are lots of options, but it is a required component that you set your sources, that you give as much information as you think will be helpful to your audience to understand the source, and then that you provide me and your bibliography a full citation of the source. So I hope that helps. Happy writing, happy researching, and as always, if you have questions, please let me know. Thanks.